What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the 11-game Week 11 main slate here on FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm going to give you some of the top plays for your DFS lineups, some picks and lineup advice for both low-risk and high-risk contests. And we are going to start with Jaylen Warren, who's my favorite play on this slate. And game of the week, surprisingly, I don't think we anticipated this after Joe Burrow's injury early in the season, but the Bengals and the Steelers have a 49.5 point total, the highest total on the board this week. Pittsburgh is favored by 6 points here in this matchup at home, and this is the second game in this divisional rivalry this season. You may remember earlier this year that Cincinnati was able to defeat Pittsburgh at home in a high-scoring thriller. In that game, Warren put up 127 rushing yards, and he had 31 receiving yards on 4 receptions. So really, really awesome performance there. And he has a really good opportunity to repeat it in this spot because in the last 3 weeks for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he has earned 75% of team rushes and has a solid 8 to 10% target share fluctuating on the season. So really high floor of touches expected. It doesn't end there. Great matchup here against Cincinnati, who by now as one of the worst defenses in the league. They're the second worst rush defense in the NFL, and they are the worst defense defending running backs in the passing game. So I do think Jaylen Warren, especially here on DraftKings at $6,100, is an excellent member of your core and probably should be an absolute staple of low-risk lineups here on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, I would say the same as well because he is just $7,000 for you FanDuel players here in Week 11. So beginning our FanDuel lineups by trying to get Jaylen Warren in there this week is how I plan to attack this slate. And I feel like Jaylen Warren is basically going to be in the majority of lineups this week, probably going to be one of, if not the most popular play in DFS this week. So don't ignore him and don't leave him out of your lineups without really focusing on this spot here. Normal agenda of the show, I like to go through the biggest favorites in betting markets because that gives us a sense for which running backs may have the best opportunity to succeed. And we have basically said this every single week. The running back that is facing the Cleveland Browns tends to be favored fairly heavily, but also tends to be a little bit on the lower owned side because Cleveland, by a lot of advanced metrics, is the best rush defense in the NFL. And that is what we're looking at here with Derrick Henry. He is going to be playing on the road here. The Ravens are favored by 7.5 points. That is right now the biggest edge in betting markets. Cleveland, the best rush defense. Cleveland, the best defense defending running backs through the air. And King Henry having somewhat of a modest output by his own standards here, looking to get back on track. Really, really tough look for him last time out against Cleveland. Baltimore won that game 41-17, but we had just 23 rushing yards on 11 carries and no opportunities in the passing game. So we shall see what happens here with King Henry. I think he's a great high-risk play. He's actually the number 1 ranked tournament play in our model this week, and we are expecting less than 10% ownership. Firmly high-risk only, not a member of our low-risk lineups this week. Right behind him for the Green Bay Packers, Josh Jacobs. Green Bay favored by 7 points in their matchup this week. Jacobs will have a really strong opportunity to perform against the New York Giants, who are starting Jameis Winston for the first time this season. And the biggest thing about this spot here for Jacobs is he's basically the only running back that has a better matchup on the ground than Jaylen Warren. The Giants are the worst rush defense in the NFL by DVOA this season, ranked 32nd, and they are roughly league average defending running backs in the passing game. A floor of 15 to 20 touches here, despite the high volume of opportunity for Emmanuel Wilson as far as backup running backs are concerned. Jacobs is going to be the guy who has most of the goal line equity here. So I think he's a great play in all contest types. I like getting him into the low risk mix alongside Jaylen Warren. And then a player that is going to also be favored by 6 points in a matchup against the Tennessee Titans. Boy, howdy, is this the game of the week. Houston at Tennessee. We have Woody Marks, who is getting really talked up by D'Amico Ryans in the media. He's kind of talking up all of his rookies at this point, basically saying he's removing the rookie label now that we're in the second half of the season and taking the training wheels off with all of these players. Will that translate to Marks seeing more than a 50-50 split with Nick Chubb? To be honest, I don't really think so at this point because they're still touting this as a RB1A, 1B situation. But I do think Marks is now definitively the 1A here. or Marks. He's got an opportunity to perform against a rush defense that is the 5th worst in the league and a well below average pass defense as well, defending running backs in the Tennessee Titans. Interesting situation here that we'll talk about in a second with the defenses. Marks, not necessarily going to be super popular this week. Looking at projected ownership, we have him at 5% on DraftKings, 7% on FanDuel. So that could be interesting for tournament lineups this week. Where this is going to be an interesting spot to monitor is with the defense. The Titans are actually looking like one of the most popular plays at DST here on DraftKings and FanDuel this week because of their low salary to jam in some of these stud receivers, because basically all of them are on this slate. But this would be immediate leverage here at this point, playing Marks in high risk instead of Titans defense. So Marks not on the low risk core for me, but a great play in a great spot. The rest of the low risk core, we've got Jaylen Warren and we've got Josh Jacobs out of this group of 4 teams that are heavily favored that I think are worth considering in your low risk player pool. On the other side of this game with Pittsburgh, because again, highest total on the board, we've got Chase Brown with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Steelers are below average defending running backs this season, and that is good news for Chase Brown. We see that as the only game this year where he went over 100 yards rushing, nearly 10 yards a carry on his 11 attempts against the Steelers at home that week. So really good spot here. His price has come very, very far down. He's $5,700. This is a little bit cheaper than last week, which was another underwhelming performance for Chase Brown. But the field is all over the spot with Chase Brown, to be clear. He's actually projecting to be the most popular play on this slate. I do think the vast majority of low-risk lineups that you see this week are going to have both Chase Brown and Jaylen Warren in them on both sites here in Week 11. Now, every single week, because he basically leads the NFL in both rush attempts and targets, roughly he's like in the top 2 in both those categories. Christian McCaffrey has the highest floor role in fantasy football. I feel like we've been saying that for like a decade at this point. But it is still true here going into Week 11 in a matchup on the road against the Arizona Cardinals, roughly league average defending running backs on the ground and slightly above league average defending running backs in the passing game. But we'll look for McCaffrey to have his floor of 6+ targets, 15+ carries here. This is the second matchup against Arizona, and they actually held him in check on the ground earlier in the season. But he had his biggest workload in the passing game with 15 targets, 10 receptions for 88 yards in that game. We'll see what happens here. Brock Purdy expected to be back under center, and that maybe will lift the efficiency for San Francisco here a little bit. That could be good news for Christian McCaffrey on the ground. Finally, and my second favorite play on this slate, I just didn't want to do the same cover boy back to back. It's going to be Rico Dowdle with the Carolina Panthers, just absolutely dominating the opportunity since they decided to give him the starting job, even with Chuba Hubbard available. The Panthers are going to be underdogs on the road here against Atlanta here in Week 11, but the Falcons are a below average rush defense and they're below average defending running backs in the passing game. This is going to be a great opportunity, I think, for Rico to absolutely smash, and I'm going to make sure that I am on the side of being able to benefit from that. I want to get him into my lineups. His salary still being under $7,000 here on DraftKings, and when we click on back on over to FanDuel and we find Rico Dowdle in the running back player pool, he's sitting at $8,100. He's starting to be priced appropriately over here. I still think Dowdle and Jaylen Warren are both underpriced for their roles and their opportunities as far as matchups are concerned here in week number 11. So these are my 2 favorite plays on the slate at the running back position. Independent of pricing, independent of sites, they're my 2 favorite running backs I want to get into my lineups this week. But I'm not really deviating from this core of guys that I've discussed here. The only guys I think I'm probably not going to include are going to be Woody Marks and Derrick Henry. So a pretty tight core of like 5 guys that I think you can play in almost every single lineup and feel pretty good about them. There are obviously some good running backs here that I have left out of the discussion in Bijan Robinson with the Falcons, James Cook with the Buffalo Bills, Kyren Williams even with the Los Angeles Rams. Certainly not ignoring those guys. I just don't know if we have the salary dollars to get to them because of some of the other things we're going to want to do here this week. And now we're going to talk about those here. It may be surprising to many that J.J. McCarthy is going to be the most popular quarterback this week, but when you consider that his price is still pretty affordable and that he's facing a Bears defense that has been very, very fantasy friendly this season, then it starts to make a ton of sense. The Bears are the 26th DVOA pass defense. They're also 25th defending the rush. So going to be a good opportunity here for the Vikings to put up some points here in both real and fantasy football. And McCarthy at $5,200 really opens up the pricing as well if you're playing him and some of these modestly priced running backs as well to get at least one of these stud receivers, maybe two of them, into your lineups this week. And that is going to be the key to the slate here, unlocking the studs at the receiver position and making sure that you have the correct one, and feel pretty good about doing that, especially at his price of $6,800 here on FanDuel. Now at receiver, there's really two ways that the field is going to go this week. Either they're going to have one stud, a couple modestly priced guy, and a punt, or they're going to have three modestly priced guys at wide receiver. The discussion around Jamar Chase as the guy at the top of this high-priced wide receiver discussion begins and kind of ends with looking at that first Pittsburgh game. And I know this is kind of that medium IQ take of look what happened last time. Obviously, it's going to happen again. I know that that's not guaranteed, but Joe Flacco has been absolutely a bounty for Jamar Chase in fantasy football. And in that first matchup with Pittsburgh, Chase had 23 targets, 16 receptions for 161 yards and a touchdown. We're looking at the fourth game of the Joe Flacco era, I believe, here for the Bengals, and we have seen 20 plus DraftKings points for Jamar Chase in every single one of those games. And his best game of the Flacco era came in that first matchup with Pittsburgh. Now at home in a more friendly environment for the offense to call plays, I do think Jamar Chase is set to have the highest floor in the game again at the position. We're just in an interesting situation here where he's not necessarily in a tier of his own anymore because of some of the other studs that we have to talk about, but I don't think there's anything wrong with prioritizing him in low risk. He's going to be about 30% owned on this slate. May not be in some low risk lineups purely because of price, but I think you probably want to get him in here. And you see we have very heavy exposure to Cincinnati and Pittsburgh with those two guys in here. Dowdle is one of my favorite plays, isn't necessarily going to be the most popular play in low risk. Once again, I do think we are going to see Chase Brown in here. And so I'll get him in here as a third running back. And now you see we have basically three players from that Cincinnati-Pittsburgh game. We're going to come back to that in the high-risk lineup. 45.66 per player remaining. One of our most popular plays for low-risk contests this week, not named Trey McBride, is going to be Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is an even $4,000 here on DraftKings, and Kyle Pitts is a even $5,000 here on FanDuel. It's very rare that when we run our underperforming wide receiver analysis that we see a tight end flash on the list. Kyle Pitts is on that list for us. And as we always say, or as I always say when I do the section of underperforming pass catchers, including the tight end, look at that touchdown column. He has not had a receiving touchdown in 5 games. He has been very, very underwhelming in each of the last 5 games. 10.4 fantasy points here on FanDuel and half PPR is the high watermark. We're looking at 14.9 in full point PPR. Still very underwhelming, but still very good on a point per dollar basis where his price is. And if we get that touchdown regression here against the Panthers, then he's absolutely going to be a phenomenal asset here this week. The Panthers are the worst pass defense in the league defending tight ends, so it's like a perfect storm for Pitts. And if that weren't enough to sell you on Kyle Pitts this week, we also have a questionable tag for Drake London. Drake London misses again here, then this is absolutely going to be a strong opportunity for Pitts to hopefully outperform what he did the first game against Carolina, where the Falcons inexplicably lost that game by 30 points here. And I like that mini correlation with Pitts and Rico Dowdle here. Obviously, the high watermark, Trey McBride, going to be the most popular play at the position because he's the highest floor player at the tight end position in fantasy football. Looking at our model, we've got Pitts between 15 and 20% ownership. Other options you can consider are going to be Theo Johnson, Oronde Gadsden, Dalton Schultz, kind of all over the place for your tight end plays behind McBride. I do think the field is going to concentrate on Pitts, especially on FanDuel, where he's expected to be the second most popular behind McBride, but I think Pitts is going to climb projected ownership on DraftKings as well. I'm going to go with the most popular defense play in our model for the purpose of like determining the rest of the low risk lineup here. So let's leave Pitts in there. Let's leave the Titans in here. We got 5,700 to finish off the wide receiver position. And if it were me, this is what I would do here, because I think that these two guys are extremely easy to get into your lineups at their current price points. Let's sort by projected ownership. Let's lower our DraftKings salary to what we have left. 5,700. You look at the most popular play here, we've got Wan'Dale Robinson with the New York Giants. They ruled out Darius Slayton, so I think he's going to have an even higher floor than what we are currently projecting without Darius Slayton available. We got him in here. We have 5,900 per player remaining for the final wide receiver spot. You got access to Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf. Ted McMillan is my favorite in this range. I think he would be the one that I would personally go with at his weighted opportunity role for the Panthers. I think he's got a really good chance to continue to have a really strong day here. And obviously, we're looking at a lot of plays from Carolina, Atlanta, a lot of plays from Cincinnati and Pittsburgh in a potential low-risk lineup here on DraftKings. One of those games, the highest total game on the week. The other, lower total at 42.5 points, but I think very concentrated volume between Dowdle, Ted McMillan, and Kyle Pitts there. Where the field is going to be here without Jamar Chase is ultimately what becomes the most interesting for making decisions in low-risk lineups. If we don't play Jamar Chase and we have 66.33 per player remaining, this is probably the range for your Trey McBride build. We're down at 58.66, so still Wan'Dale, in my opinion, here viable. Let's look at what's going to be very popular this week without the salary filter. Our model right now is kind of splitting the difference with these three big studs behind Jamar Chase. Justin Jefferson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Puka Nacua all going to be about 17%, so call it 15 to 20% on both DraftKings and FanDuel. And that's just because it's going to be hard to get to them and Jamar Chase, and that's where we think ownership will concentrate. But as far as value goes, Dobbs with Green Bay at $5,000, the definitive wide receiver one for the Packers here, and for Jordan Love coming off of a really disappointing output for the entire Packers offense in primetime last week. He'll be popular. That leaves us 7,100 for that final receiver spot with the punt defense. Looks like projected ownership would be on the side of getting Nico Collins as the final receiver in our low-risk lineup here. Just going by projected ownership, right, for a low-risk build. So a couple of different ways to slice it here on DraftKings. And over on FanDuel, once again, we're going to have the Titans. Probably want to get cheap Chase Brown in here. We got 6,700 per player remaining for receiver on FanDuel. So by FanDuel ownership, Rashee Rice is going to actually be the most popular play on FanDuel because his FanDuel salary is a much lower price on their salary scale, and therefore he pops more in models. So we have him as an option, but if we click on him at 8,200, that means we're going to have really few dollars remaining to play with. 5,200 remaining. I actually think we have a play here in Greg Dortch with the Arizona Cardinals because Marvin Harrison Jr. is out this week, and I think Dortch will be your primary slot receiver here. So I certainly think this is a play here. You could also not play Rice in low risk, and you could play Wan'Dale, who I haven't clicked on, who's just 5,800, which is an extremely strong bargain compared to his FanDuel price, especially. 7,600 remaining. We got Ladd McConkey, Metcalf, T. Higgins, really any of these guys I like, but let's see who the favored play in our model is. FanDuel, lower that slider to 7,600. Go by FanDuel OF index and ownership. It looks like we got Dobbs here as our favorite play, and we actually have Dobbs projected for 10 plus targets. Wan'Dale, Dobbs, they're popping as highly owned plays this week. They're not necessarily my favorite plays in their ranges, so definitely think there are things we can do there. Like, for example, I like Tet a lot better than Wan'Dale. I don't think that's going to be on the side of projected ownership here, but this would be closer to a low-risk build that I like over FanDuel. But what everybody likes to hear about is high risk. And my favorite stack on this slate is going to be Joe Flacco and the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's real easy to just go Flacco, the receiver that he targeted 23 times, the popular running backs on both sides of this game. And that is probably the highest upside 3-1 on this slate. It's also probably going to be the highest owned outside of the quarterback position, 3-1 that you can stack this week. But if we just layer in some of those popular plays at the Titans, I can go for that skinny stack with Kyle Pitts and Rico Dowdle that I really like this week. I got 55, 50 for two final wide receivers. There are a few underperforming wide receivers this week that I am interested in targeting, one of which is Troy Franklin with the Denver Broncos. He is the number one underperforming wide receiver in our model. Look, we see 8+ targets in the last 3 weeks. We do see touchdowns in that sample, but his air yards have been absolutely astronomically high in the National Football League in the last 3 weeks. Troy Franklin with 452 air yards in Denver's last 3 games. He's got 15 receptions, 156 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So a lot of actual fantasy points. Still actually has 23 less fantasy points than expected. So as good as he has been, he has had the room to be even better the way that he's been used. And this is looking like a game where Denver's potentially going to have to keep throwing against Kansas City at home. So really like Troy Franklin as a low-owned play. He's actually our number 1 ranked wide receiver in the Occupy model as well. And at his low price of $5,400 here on DraftKings, leaves me $5,700 for a final spot. That would be enough for one of these guys, Tet McMillan, Wan'Dale Robinson. Another underperforming wide receiver sitting here in Jordan Addison. Addison with the Vikings. Addison's underperforming status really comes down to last week's game against Baltimore. You see that right here on the screen with just 3 receptions for 35 yards on his 11 targets. And he's not the only underperforming wide receiver on his team. Justin Jefferson is also up there. Jefferson, you see the all-important touchdown column. He does have 1 in there in the recent sample, but these receiving yardage and even reception totals on his volume of 9+ targets in the last actually 6 games, but the last 3 games we'll look at for the analysis here, still really strong, still great opportunity for Justin Jefferson, one of the top weighted opportunity wide receivers in the league, number 3 in that sample, 37% share of team targets, 46% share of team air yards, and has underperformed his opportunity by about 30 fantasy points in that sample. So another reason maybe to be into JJ McCarthy in all contest types. But those are 3 of my favorite underperforming wide receivers on our list this week for high-risk lineups. Jefferson doesn't fit the build that I have on the screen right now, but I'm going to try to find my way to him in some builds this week for sure. Looking at our full list of underperforming wide receivers for week 11, appropriately, I have 11 of them. I have 11 underperforming wide receivers, and that's not including the underperforming tight end we talked about earlier in Kyle Pitts. So a Cincinnati-Pittsburgh stack, my favorite this week. I'm going back to the well with Seattle and the Rams here. We've got Sam Darnold. Hopefully he actually has to throw the ball more than once in the final 3 quarters of a game. Seems like Seattle has not played a competitive game yet where they've been forced to keep throwing the ball downfield. But when that happens, it just feels like JSN is going to be the guy that benefits from that the most. He has by far the best weighted opportunity role in the National Football League. You see 6 targets here last week. Seems like a deviation from the last few weeks, but remember, they only threw the ball 12 times last week. He got half of those targets. And then we have, this is more of a speculative asset play here for me, but with Seattle going into LA, we've got the revenge game for Cooper Kupp here, and his price, super affordable, $4,100. He's my favorite secondary receiver to include in a Seattle stack. And then obviously, we got a real easy set of bringbacks here in Puka Nacua, who has had a strong role for the Rams here. And then we have the goal line back in Devontae Adams. You see he's questionable here, but he is expected to play despite drawing that status here on the final report of the week here on Friday. Expected to play on Sunday. Between these 2 guys, I don't think you can go wrong with either one. Obviously, my preference would be Nacua. Makes your salary a little tight. But let's see if we can get there. 45-20 per player remaining. We're definitely going to have to go with the Titans defense here to try to make this fit. I feel good about having this cheap underperforming tight end to get to. And then we know what my favorite running backs are on this slate. Getting a skinny stack with the 2 running backs from that high total game between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh leaves me $4,500 for a final play. I think it's probably a 4 pass catcher lineup if you're going to 3-1 Seattle and LA this week, because I don't think there's a running back in this range, $4,500 or less, but I do think there are plenty of receivers that we can get in here. Keon Coleman with Buffalo, certainly interesting. Christian Watson with Green Bay, they have a high implied team total. When you go into our model, remember, you can always just filter for what you're looking for here. And you can do one of 2 things. You can sort by projected ownership and just put some chalk in there. We've got obviously a play with Arizona here and Michael Wilson. That should be fairly popular this week. We've got 7 targets with Jerry Jeudy, and he fits for sure. So I think it's viable to get 2 of these high-priced guys in Jackson Smith-Njigba and Puka Nacua into a high-risk lineup. These are 2 of my favorite stacks, but I have 6 that are available for you in the daily plug posted at occupyfantasy.com. So you're going to want to make sure to be subscribed to the site to get access to our daily plug, which is posted every Friday night of the NFL season for the upcoming slate of action. That's going to do it for me here in week 11, guys. Good luck this week. I hope to see you back on the channel here for week 12.